Where is the podcast, nah? Hurry up and drop it.
Yo, what a podcast at?
Where's the podcast now? Hurry up and make a podcast. Make a podcast now. Drop the podcast.
Hurry up and drop the podcast.
What you waiting on now? Drop that podcast, boo. Drop that podcast, cause the time is now.
What a podcast?
Come on now, you gotta make the podcast, nah. Where's the podcast at? You said you was about to drop. Where is it at? Where is it at? We waiting for it. Where is it at? Come on now.
Welcome to the fourth episode of Also She Talks. If you are a returning viewer, sorry for the wait. My apologies. I just have been overwhelmed between work and school and my personal life and a whole bunch of other stuff. And if you're new, please like, comment, subscribe, and go watch all the other podcasts. I had a conversation with one of my really close friends, and during that conversation, like I was saying that I'm starting to think that maybe podcasting not for me, because like the views not there, and maybe it's not something I should be doing. And during that conversation, my friend asked me, like, when you first started podcasting, did you start it for the views, or did you start it because you had a message to share? And like that snapped me right back into like where I needed to be. And today our episode kind of hits on that. So today we're going to talk about self-doubt, fear of failure, and expectations. Now, self-doubt is the feeling of uncertainty about your decisions, abilities, or worth. It often involves questioning whether or not you are good enough to succeed or make the right choices. Allowing self-doubt to fester and participate in rumination, which for those of y'all that don't know what rumination is, it's kind of like when you get into those thought cycles and like you can't turn your mind off, you keep replaying a certain conversation over and over, you keep replaying a certain situation over and over, and you just like picking every single detail apart and you cannot get out of it. It's like a constant loop. And the issue with that is when you participate in behaviors like that and like you allow the self-doubt to fester, it disrupts your trust within yourself and it kind of like knocks you out of alignment. When you're truly in touch with yourself and in touch with the universe, you'll always show up as your most authentic self, and you'll understand that things happen exactly as they should and everything happens for you. Grounding yourself in the present can free you from the anxiety and regret that comes from self-doubt. The place in my life where self-doubt is most common is my career. Throughout my career, I found myself many times feeling like maybe I don't belong here, maybe I am inadequate, maybe I am not fit for the job. And I feel like that stemmed from one, being new, and also two, like my first job out of college, I was the youngest person on my team. I was the most recent graduate, and I was the only one that had absolutely no experience in what I was doing. And so I found myself in all these situations feeling stupid, or like with any job, you make mistakes or you have to ask silly questions, and it's kind of frustrating. And I would like get in my head about it all the time. Like maybe I chose the wrong career field, or maybe I'm just not smart enough. Maybe the problem is me. I would take those thoughts and I would fester on them. And I would be rethinking all of the times I was at work and maybe I said something stupid in a meeting, or maybe somebody asked me a question and I didn't know the answer, or maybe I made a mistake and I had to have somebody come help me, or things like that. And I would let it bother me a lot, and it gave me a lot of additional anxiety with showing up to work every day. I spent so much time feeling inadequate to the point that I wouldn't volunteer for things that I probably should have. I wouldn't really speak up. Like, let's say I feel like I know the answer to something, or I feel like I have an idea, I wouldn't really say much about it. I would stay quiet. It also kept me in my shell. I was scared to gain new experiences and venture out. So that did nothing but harm me. I second guessed myself even on things that I was right about. And one day I woke up and I asked myself, why do I care? Even if I did come off as dumb because I said the wrong thing in a meeting, even if someone did ask me a question and I did not know, that's all part of growth. And that was just part of my journey. But even with that, doubt may still visit from time to time, but it doesn't have to stay. It's your choice to either give it power and fester and feed into it, or to let it go. There will always be a voice in your head feeding you the worst what ifs. But the thing about it is, we create our own reality. So it doesn't matter if you say it doesn't matter, and that's not the narrative if you say that's not the narrative. One of the things that helped me the most is reminding myself I made it here and I am made for here. Every single day you should tell yourself that. I don't care if you got to tell yourself it 50 times a day. Remind yourself that the light is wherever you are. Those thoughts of self-doubt will always be there, but you don't have to feed them. You do not have to pick them up. You do not have to internalize them. And if you leave them alone, they will pass. The issue is when we pick them up and we internalize them, we don't do anything but chip away at our alignment and unintentionally disrupt our peace. Now, our next topic is fear of failure. Now, fear of failure is a common characteristic of self-doubt. We are all afraid of falling on our face. All of us. It's perfectly normal. No one wants to put their all into something and have it crumble. But fear of failure becomes a problem when it stops us from even trying. It's one thing to acknowledge risk, but it's another thing to let fear dictate our actions and decisions. When we convince ourselves that failure is inevitable, we sabotage ourselves before we can even begin. The thing about it is, if we as people understood the power and the influence of our thoughts, we would never think a negative thought again. We'd realize that we have so much control over our own outcomes. Our thoughts shape our beliefs, and our beliefs dictate our actions. When we allow doubt and fear to dominate our internal narrative, it limits our potential and stifles our growth. When you abandon the anxiety that comes from the fear of failing, you realize that failure is not an enemy, it's a teacher. I truly believe that if you learn from a situation, you never really failed. Every misstep can become an opportunity for growth if you shape it that way. The key is to reframe failure as a stepping stone instead of a dead end. Some of the most successful people in the world have failed. Once upon a time, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. He then came back to Apple and helped make it one of the most successful companies even to this day. And no one would have thought that if they knew that he had got fired years prior. And the same with Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was actually cut from his high school basketball team only to go on and become one of the greatest NBA players in history. Never let your failures limit you or limit your future. I also wanted to tell y'all a quote that Michael Jordan said. He said, "I fail over and over. That's why I'm able to succeed." Instead of fearing failure, what if we lean into the possibility of learning and evolving through it? Instead of asking yourself, what if I fail? What if I fall flat on my face? What if my podcast don't blow up? What if my hair business don't thrive? What if this don't happen? Ask yourself, what if you do? Instead of entertaining the fear of failure, focus on thoughts of possibility, strength, and resilience. The energy that we put into our minds sets the foundation for our reality. And by choosing to believe in ourselves and envision success, we create a mindset that pushes us forward instead of pulling us back. Now that we talked about self-doubt and we talked about fear of failure, that leads us to the last part, because both self-doubt and fear of failure can be triggered by having expectations. The thing about expectations is that we create them ourselves. So for instance, we create our own expectation and our own example and definition of what we think success should look like. When I first started my podcast, I came up with the idea that if I didn't reach 50 subscribers, maybe my podcast was not worth pursuing. Maybe if at least 50 people didn't want to consistently hear me talk, podcasting is not something I should be doing. That was me setting an expectation or a quota or a number. And that expectation, quota, and number is what later led to me feeling discouraged, like I talked about earlier in the podcast. The thing about it is, the number shouldn't matter, right? Because I started the podcast because I had a message to share. It wouldn't matter if only 5 people showed up here consistently, as long as I'm doing the goal, which is getting out my message, right? So the issue was that I created my own expectation. Nobody told me that I should have 50 subscribers in order for me to know podcasting was worth pursuing. Literally nobody said that. I created that expectation within myself, and instead of creating something that could uplift me and motivate me, I created a harmful expectation that made me feel discouraged. So while I had the power to determine what success looked like for me, I decided to make it about something it wasn't about a number or a quota. The thing about defining success for ourselves is that it requires being kind to yourself. In addition to that, it also involves adjusting your goals as needed when things don't go as planned, which no one wants to adjust their goals. No one wants to feel like they didn't reach the mark. It can kind of make you feel defeated, but you have to remind yourself that adjusting your goals does not mean giving up. Adjusting your goals just means that you're growing and you're meeting yourself exactly where you are, instead of placing harmful expectations on yourself like I did. An example of having to adjust my goals to meet me where I was at the time was when I was in undergrad. So a little backstory. Throughout K through 12, I was used to being one of the smartest kids in all of my classes. I made really good grades. School was relatively easy for me. I never really had to study. So I had the high expectations that I would get to undergrad and I would do the exact same thing. I had the expectation that I would have a stellar GPA, that I would do very good in all of my classes, and I was very, very disappointed to find out that college was much, much harder, and not only that, that I would experience failure for the first time. Organic Chemistry 1 is where I got my first F in my life. And I cried like a baby and I really wanted to drop out because I had that high expectation that I would maintain a certain GPA and that I wouldn't fall beneath that. The issue with that is I started to feel those same feelings we talked about earlier. Maybe I don't belong. Maybe I chose the wrong thing. Maybe I shouldn't be in college. Maybe I chose the wrong major. In reality, none of those things were true. I just needed to shift my goals, my expectations, but I also needed to shift my tactic. I needed to learn how to study. I needed to learn how to go to office hours more. For me to not feel so defeated every single time I didn't meet this mark, I needed to adjust my expectations. My expectations of myself throughout undergrad changed from being, achieve this certain GPA, to show up as my best self, focus on actually learning the material and retaining it instead of focusing on a letter grade, and just to simply complete my program and get my degree. And I did exactly that. The world is already harsh, so don't be harsh on yourself. By having those high expectations and condemning myself every time I couldn't meet that mark, I was being just as harsh on myself as the rest of the world would be. I was creating an extra layer of pressure and anxiety that was unnecessary. So I want y'all all to think about, what expectations do you have for yourself? Are they helping you or are they harming you? And if they're not helpful, how can they be changed or reframed to better benefit you? So thank y'all for listening to this episode. A lot of people in this world are already counting you out. They're already looking for you to fail, looking for you to not succeed. So don't be another person that counts yourself out. Believe in yourself, push through, persevere, find a reason to keep going. Even if that means failing and getting back up, even if that means reframing your goals, even if that means going back to the drawing board and starting from scratch from day one all over again. You gotta maintain the thought process that you can do absolutely anything you put your mind to and keep pushing forward. Thank y'all, and I'll see y'all next episode. An older version of me would have replayed that situation in my head all day and thought like, next time they see me, they're probably gonna think I'm dumb. I hate lip gloss. That woke me up and snapped me right back into reality because I absolutely started it because I have a message that I want to share. So now we're back at it and I'm trying to be consistent. I promise I am.